My best friend, Jason. The dawn, a warm, gilded wash across my bedroom window, always felt like a personal summons. Another day, another blank page. I'd lever myself from bed, the protests of aging springs a familiar chorus, and gravitate toward my easel. Turpentine and oil paint formed my personal fragrance, vibrant hues my daily affirmation. I wasn't renowned, nor particularly skilled by professional metrics, but painting was my tether, my lens for interpreting the beautiful, sprawling chaos of the world. I captured faces in the park, the intricate filigree of leaves, the way light fractured across the weathered bricks of our neighborhood cafe. My existence, to most, might appear unassuming, even ordinary. Yet to me, it was a symphony of precise, miniature epiphanies. My phone trilled, a cheerful vibration from the nightstand. A text from Jason. Coffee? My place, 7:30. Don't be late. Predictably punctual, always direct. That was Jason. He resided a few blocks away, in a compact apartment that carried the faint scent of aged paper and something metallic, like a workshop. He was a mechanic, a savant with engines, capable of coaxing breath back into the most recalcitrant contraptions. While my hands bore the indelible marks of pigment, his were perpetually smudged with grease, calloused from wrestling with wrenches. We were diametric opposites, a curiously harmonious pair, and our friendship was the most comforting constant in my life. Our paths had converged in kindergarten. I recalled it vividly. A tear-streaked 5-year-old me, my prized crayon cruelly snapped by an overly zealous classmate. Jason, even then a quiet sentinel, had simply approached, wordlessly offered his own pristine blue, then positioned himself between me and the aggressor, a silent, unyielding bulwark. We'd been inseparable ever since. He was the unwavering oak to my rambling vine, the steadfast peak to my drifting cumulus. Through scraped knees and nascent infatuations, through high school dramatics and the bewildering chasm of adulthood, Jason remained. He was the one who listened without judgment as I wrestled with the painting that refused to coalesce. He'd occupy my studio couch, nursing a lukewarm beer, offering little more than a grunt or a nod, yet his presence was a warm embrace. He was the one who ferried me home, no questions posed, after one too many drinks at a party, ensuring my safe passage inside before receding into the tranquil night. I recalled a particularly bleak period a few years prior. I had poured my soul into a mural for a community center, only for the funding to evaporate at the 11th hour. I was desolate, consumed by a sense of utter failure. I retreated into my apartment, ignoring calls, allowing the world to dissolve into a dull gray. It was Jason who finally breached the solitude. He didn't knock, he simply let himself in with the spare key I'd entrusted him with years ago. He discovered me curled on the sofa, staring vacantly at a half-finished canvas. He offered no profound pronouncements. He merely settled beside me, presented a takeout container of my favorite pad thai, and initiated a documentary about deep-sea fishing. Gradually, the comforting aroma of the food and the low thrum of the television began to erode my despondency. By the time the documentary concluded, I found myself chuckling at some absurd Piscean factoid. He didn't strive to mend the situation, nor did he proffer empty assurances. He simply was. and that, unfailingly, sufficed. I showered swiftly, the warm spray a soothing balm against my skin, then donned a soft, faded t-shirt and jeans. My reflection regarded me, bright, inquisitive eyes, a perpetual faint smile, a few errant paint smudges on my cheek. I wasn't conventionally handsome, but I was at ease in my own skin. My internal compass invariably pointed toward joy, toward unearthing the silver lining. It was a trait Jason often teased me about, labeling me an eternal optimist. Yet I knew he secretly valued it. Walking to Jason's apartment, the bracing morning air nipped at my cheeks. The city was just stirring, the distant hum of traffic a nascent murmur. I envisioned Jason now, likely already brewing coffee, perhaps tinkering with a carburetor on his kitchen counter, blissfully unaware it was, in fact, a kitchen. He was meticulous in his craft, but his living space frequently resembled the aftermath of an explosion in a hardware store. Upon my arrival, the door was, predictably, ajar. "Morning, sunshine," I called out, navigating around a forgotten wrench. Jason glanced up from the stove, where he was decanting steaming coffee into two disparate mugs. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, a faint grease smudge adorning his jawline. He was taller than me, broader too, with shoulders that suggested they could bear the world's burdens. His eyes, the color of a tumultuous sea, typically held a calm, unwavering gaze. Today, however, a flicker of something else, a shadow I couldn't quite decipher, briefly crossed them before he averted his attention back to the coffee. "Liam," he grunted, less a greeting than his own particular brand of one. He extended a mug toward me, stout and black, precisely as I preferred it. He understood my inclinations better than I did at times. "Rough night?" I inquired, noting the faint shadows beneath his eyes. He shrugged, stirring his own coffee, avoiding my gaze. "Just a client with an especially stubborn engine. Kept me awake." I nodded, accepting the explanation without scrutiny. Jason wasn't one to dwell or to divulge much of his interior landscape. He kept his emotions closely guarded, a vault accessible to only a select few. I considered myself among that privileged cadre, though even I seldom received a full disclosure. His candor, when it emerged, was usually in short, clipped sentences. "Well, you smell of exhaust and sleep deprivation," I bantered gently, taking a sip of the robust coffee. It was perfect. A faint flush crept up his neck, and he turned away, busying himself with polishing a spot on the counter that was already immaculate. He always became a little flustered when I commented on anything personal, a trait I found endearing. It offered a fleeting glimpse into the softer, more vulnerable facet he rarely showcased. "So, anything exciting slated for your day of artistic brilliance?" he asked, shifting the topic, his voice a touch gruff. I grinned. "Actually, yes. I'm contemplating tackling that old mural on Elm Street. It's practically crying out for a repaint, and I have an idea for a phoenix ascending from the ashes, symbolizing, well, you know." He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his lips. He might not fully grasp my artistic vision, but he invariably understood my fervor. And that, above all else, was why Jason was my best friend. He was my bedrock, my confidant, the quiet anchor in the beautiful, tumultuous ocean of my existence. He was perpetually present, a steady, unfaltering force and for that, I was eternally thankful. I simply couldn't conceive of my world without him. A rainy night's surprise. The rain began softly, a gentle tapping against Liam's window pane, then grew into a steady rhythm, washing the late afternoon light into a muted gray. Liam, curled on his sofa with a sketchbook open on his lap, felt a pleasant lethargy settle over him. The coffee Jason had made that morning, a dark roast with just a hint of vanilla, still lingered on his tongue, a comforting ghost of their shared ritual. He'd spent the day lost in the swirling colors of his mural idea, the vibrant blues and greens of a burgeoning urban garden taking shape in his mind. The thought of bringing that life to a stark brick wall filled him with an invigorating joy. He stretched, arching his back and letting out a contented sigh. The apartment was quiet, save for the drumming rain. He considered putting on some music, perhaps some mellow jazz, but the natural sound of the storm was oddly soothing. Just as he was contemplating a simple dinner, a sudden, frantic banging echoed through the quiet building. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor, nor the insistent ring of a delivery driver. This was raw, desperate, and unmistakably Jason. Liam shot up, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Jason never just banged. Jason knocked, usually a soft, almost hesitant rap, or he texted. Liam strode to the door, his heart thudding against his ribs. He peered through the peephole, and his breath hitched. Jason stood on his doorstep, drenched and shivering, his usually meticulously styled dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, normally a calm, steady hazel, were wide and unfocused, darting around as if searching for something unseen. There was a raw fear etched onto his face that Liam had never witnessed before, not even during Jason's mother's illness, a period when he'd been withdrawn and quiet, but never outwardly terrified. His normally composed demeanor had utterly crumbled. He looked smaller, vulnerable, like a child lost in a storm. Liam yanked the door open. Jason? What in God's name? Jason didn't speak. He simply stumbled forward, past Liam, his shoulder brushing against the doorframe. He didn't look at Liam, didn't offer an explanation, didn't even acknowledge Liam's presence. He just moved. A man propelled by an unseen force directly into Liam's bedroom. Liam stood frozen for a moment, the cold rain spraying in from the open doorway. The shock of seeing Jason like this, so utterly unlike himself, rooted him to the spot. He quickly closed and locked the door, then hurried after his friend. Jason was already in the bed, fully clothed, shoes and all. He hadn't even pulled back the covers, just crawled on top of the duvet, his body curled into a tight ball, facing the wall. Liam could see his shoulders trembling, not from the cold, he realized with a pang, but from something deeper. Liam approached the bed cautiously. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with unspoken terror. He didn't know what to do, what to say. Jason had always been his rock, the unshakable foundation of his world. To see him so utterly shattered was disorienting, like the very ground beneath Liam's feet had shifted. Jason? Liam's voice was a soft whisper. He reached out a hand, hovering uncertainly over Jason's back. He wanted to offer comfort, to ask what had happened, but the raw vulnerability radiating from Jason held him back. It felt too fragile, too easily broken. Jason flinched at Liam's touch, a slight tremor running through him. He didn't uncurl, didn't turn. He just burrowed deeper into himself, his face pressed into the pillow. Liam slowly withdrew his hand. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb him. He could hear Jason's ragged breathing, punctuated by an occasional shuddering gasp. The rain outside continued its relentless drumming, an insistent soundtrack to the silent drama unfolding in the room. Liam stayed there for what felt like hours, a silent sentinel. He didn't press for answers. He just existed, a steady, warm presence in the face of Jason's unspoken horror. He watched the subtle rise and fall of Jason's back, listened to the frantic beat of his own heart, and felt a profound sense of helplessness. Eventually, exhausted by the emotional weight of the moment, Liam carefully slipped under the covers on the other side of the bed. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of Jason's huddled form just a few feet away. The scent of rain and damp denim filled the air, mingling with the familiar smell of Liam's own sheets. Throughout the long, dark night, Jason didn't move. He remained a silent, unmoving presence, radiating an intense, almost palpable fear. Liam, for his part, didn't sleep. He listened to the rain, to Jason's uneven breathing, and to the frantic questions that swirled in his own mind. What could have terrified Jason so profoundly? What unspeakable thing had driven his stoic, self-contained best friend to seek such desperate, wordless refuge in the middle of a rainy night? The answers, he knew, would have to wait. For now, all he could do was be there, a silent anchor in a storm of unknown origins. He felt Jason shift slightly as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, and then a long, deep sigh escaped Jason's lips, almost imperceptibly. Morning silence. The first blush of dawn stretched across Liam's ceiling, painting the familiar space in hues of rose and pearl. He stirred, a pleasant weight beside him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the duvet. Jason. The memory of the night's terror was a faint echo, overshadowed by the unexpected intimacy of waking next to his best friend. Liam risked a glance. Jason was still asleep, his face turned towards Liam, surprisingly peaceful now, the lines of fear smoothed away by slumber. A stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead, and Liam had an absurd, tender urge to brush it back. He didn't. Instead, he simply watched, feeling a strange, profound closeness that hummed beneath his skin. It was quiet, save for the gentle rhythm of Jason's breathing, a comforting counterpoint to the city's distant, waking hum. Liam lay there, suspended between sleep and full wakefulness, savoring the moment. The terror of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike in the soft morning light, a figment of a troubled mind. Jason, nestled beside him, felt solid, real, and utterly unthreatening. This was his Jason, his anchor, his oldest friend. Perhaps the storm had simply been too much, the sheer force of the rain and wind rattling him. Liam felt a deep surge of protectiveness, a silent vow that whatever had disturbed Jason so profoundly, he would face it with him. He was ready to listen, to hold, to simply be there. Minutes later, Jason stirred. His eyes fluttered open, blinking against the nascent light. For a brief, suspended second, his gaze met Liam's, and Liam saw a flicker of something unreadable. Not fear, not pain, but a kind of blank neutrality. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a familiar, easygoing smile. "Morning, sleepyhead," Jason mumbled, his voice a little rough with sleep, utterly devoid of the tremor Liam remembered from hours ago. He stretched, a cat-like arch of his back, and pushed himself up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Man, I slept like a log. You got coffee?" Liam blinked, a strange disquiet settling over him. He watched Jason walk to the window, pulling back the curtain to assess the day. The sun was fully up now, mocking the shadows of the night. Jason's movements were fluid, unburdened. There was no lingering stiffness, no haunted look in his eyes. "Coffee machine's on the counter," Liam managed, his voice sounding oddly strained to his own ears. He felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if he had woken into a different reality entirely. The Jason who had sought refuge in his bed, drenched and trembling, was simply gone. Jason turned, a bright, morning fresh smile on his face. "Perfect. I'm starving. Eggs? Toast? You know I can whip up a mean breakfast." He headed towards the kitchen, his gait light, whistling a tuneless melody. Liam got out of bed, the sheets feeling cold now that Jason's warmth was gone. He walked into the kitchen, his senses overwhelmed by the smell of brewing coffee and the clatter of pans. Jason was already cracking eggs into a bowl, humming. He seemed utterly, completely normal. Too normal. "Jason?" Liam began, his voice hesitant. "About last night." Jason looked up, a spatula in his hand, a small frown creasing his brow. "Last night? What about it?" "Oh, right, the storm. Wild, wasn't it? I swear, I thought my roof was going to blow off. Good thing I live just down the street. Figured I'd wait it out here." "You got hit pretty hard too, huh?" He gestured vaguely towards the window. "Looks like the worst of it passed, though. Clear skies now." Liam stared at him, a knot tightening in his chest. The carefully constructed narrative Jason was weaving was so seamless, so utterly convincing, that Liam almost doubted his own memories. The frantic pounding on the door, the terror in Jason's eyes, the way he'd curled into a ball on Liam's bed, unresponsive to all questions. It was as if none of it had ever happened. You were pretty shaken up," Liam pressed gently, trying to keep his voice even. "You came in soaking wet. You didn't say anything." Jason chuckled, a light, dismissive sound. "Oh, that? Yeah, well, I practically ran through a monsoon to get here. Freezing, too. Just wanted to get out of the rain. And honestly, I was half asleep by the time I hit your bed. Probably just mumbled something incoherent." "Happens to the best of us, right?" He winked, then turned back to the sizzling pan, expertly flipping eggs. "Anyway, eggs are nearly done. How do you like yours?" Liam watched him, a cold sense of dread creeping in. He felt a mix of confusion and a sharp, unexpected pang of hurt. Jason wasn't just glossing over it. He was actively erasing it, rewriting the script of their shared night. The terror, the vulnerability, the unspoken plea for comfort. It was all being swept under the rug, deemed inconvenient, too messy to acknowledge. The silence that followed Jason's cheerful offer of breakfast was heavy, punctuated only by the sizzle of the eggs and the gentle gurgle of the coffee machine. Liam looked at his best friend, this man he thought he knew so intimately, and suddenly felt a vast, unbridgeable distance open between them. He wanted to shake Jason, to demand answers, to force him to confront the raw fear he'd witnessed. But Jason's easy smile, his casual demeanor, presented an impenetrable wall. "Scrambled is fine," Liam finally said, his voice flat, his earlier feelings of closeness utterly evaporated, replaced by a profound bewilderment. He sat down at the small kitchen table, the aroma of breakfast doing little to whet his appetite. The morning was silent, not with the peace of shared intimacy, but with the deafening, unspoken weight of a truth ignored. The days that followed blurred into a strange tapestry of normalcy and unsettling undercurrents. Jason, true to his word, acted as if the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream attributed to the weather. He was his usual boisterous self, laughing easily, making offhand comments about the lingering dampness in the air, and completely sidestepping any mention of the fear that had contorted his face or the desperate grip he'd held on Liam. Liam, in turn, found himself navigating a new landscape of polite evasion, a silent agreement to pretend away a moment of profound vulnerability. There was a weight on his chest, a constant hum of confusion and hurt that no amount of Jason's cheerful banter could dispel. Then, the late-night visits began. It started subtly, a knock on Liam's door just as the streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows across his bedroom window. The first time, Liam, already half asleep, had assumed he'd misheard. But the knock came again, softer this time, insistent. He'd opened the door to find Jason, not in the frantic state of that storm-ravaged night, but simply there. Jason would offer a vague explanation, a sudden craving for a movie, a forgotten assignment he thought Liam might have, or simply couldn't sleep. These visits became a quiet ritual. Weeks melted into a month, and Jason was at Liam's door more often than not once the moon was high. They didn't talk much about anything substantial. Sometimes they'd sprawl on the sofa, the muted glow of the television casting shifting patterns across their faces as they watched some B-grade action film Liam barely registered. Other times, they'd just sit, perched on opposite ends of the worn couch, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator or the distant thrum of traffic. Jason would sometimes offer a low-voiced observation about the movie or a fleeting thought about something that had happened during the day, and Liam would respond in kind, their voices soft, almost reverent, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace they'd built between them in the darkness. Liam found himself anticipating these nocturnal intrusions with a strange mix of apprehension and a burgeoning warmth. He'd lie in bed, listening to the creaks and groans of his old house, a knot of expectation tightening in his stomach. When the knock finally came, a quiet thrill would ripple through him, quickly followed by a pang of the old confusion. How could the same person who rewrote their shared past so effortlessly now seek out his company with such quiet persistence? One evening, they were watching an ancient sci-fi movie, the kind with wobbly sets and melodramatic acting. Jason, usually so animated, was unusually still, his gaze fixed on the screen but seemingly unfocused. Liam risked a glance, studying the familiar profile, the slight stubble on his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He noticed a new softness around Jason's eyes, a quality he hadn't seen before. It wasn't the wide-eyed terror of that storm-battered night, nor the easy cheerfulness of their daylight interactions. This was something else entirely. A depth, a quiet yearning that made Liam's breath catch in his throat. As the alien ship exploded in a shower of sparks on screen, Jason turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting Liam's. There was no flippancy, no quick dismissal in that gaze. It was warm, almost tender, holding Liam's for a beat longer than usual. A shiver traced its way down Liam's spine, a delicious, unsettling sensation. His heart, usually a steady drumbeat, began to flutter, a frantic hummingbird trapped in his chest. He felt himself flush, a heat creeping up his neck, and quickly averted his eyes, focusing intently on the credits rolling up the screen. He heard Jason clear his throat softly, a small, almost imperceptible sound. When Liam dared to look back, Jason's expression had already softened into something more neutral, though the lingering warmth in his eyes was still palpable. He offered a small, crooked smile. "That was surprisingly terrible," Jason murmured, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. Liam managed a shaky laugh, the sound feeling foreign and strained in his own ears. "You loved every minute of it, admit it." Jason chuckled, a genuine, unforced sound that usually brought a smile to Liam's face. But tonight, it only deepened the knot of confusion in Liam's gut. The easy camaraderie of their late-night ritual had suddenly been pierced by something new, something indefinable and intensely personal. That look in Jason's eyes, soft and searching, lingered in Liam's mind long after Jason had finally left, vanishing into the pre-dawn quiet. Liam lay awake for hours, the image burned behind his eyelids, wrestling with a burgeoning hope and a profound sense of unease. He was certain he hadn't imagined it. But what did it mean? And why did it feel so much like a secret? A fragile thing that could shatter at the slightest touch. Unspoken touch. The nocturnal visits had become an unspoken ritual, a fixture in Liam's life that defied logic yet felt utterly essential. Jason would materialize, a silhouette etched against the porch light, offering a murmured excuse about a restless mind or a forgotten book. His stays were brief, but his presence settled over the quiet house like a welcome, weighty blanket. They'd inhabit the space together, sometimes on the sofa, sometimes at the kitchen table. A shared existence. The silence between them had long since shed its awkwardness, now a rich tapestry woven with shared history and nascent possibilities. Tonight they occupied the sofa, a neglected mug of tea cooling on the coffee table. The only illumination stemmed from the distant street lamp, its faint glow painting long, sinuous shadows across the room. Liam was recounting a trivial workplace anecdote, the sort of story usually confined to his online journal. Jason listened, his gaze drifting somewhere beyond Liam's shoulder. Yet Liam registered the warmth of his attention, a subtle current in the air. Liam concluded, allowing the comfortable quiet to expand, unhurried. He studied Jason, noting how the dim light softened the sharp planes of his jaw, the faint curve of lips usually set in a stern line. There was a raw vulnerability in these late-night iterations of Jason, a jagged edge conspicuously absent during their daytime encounters. This particular Jason stirred something deep within Liam, a perplexing blend of protective instinct and aching desire. Jason shifted, turning his head fractionally. His eyes, dark pools in the meager light, found Liam's. No intense scrutiny now, just a quiet acknowledgement, a synchronicity of breath. A familiar warmth bloomed in Liam's chest, a sensation inextricably linked to these stolen hours. It's been a strange week, Jason murmured, his voice a low thrum that vibrated between them. Liam simply nodded, unwilling to shatter the delicate spell with words. He understood. Everything felt strange. The world had tipped on its axis the night Jason, terrified, had sought refuge, and it hadn't quite righted itself since. A moment stretched, taut with unspoken meanings. Liam's gaze was drawn to Jason's hand, resting on the cushion beside him. It was a strong hand, weathered by years of physical labor, yet in the muted light it seemed to possess a delicate fragility. He imagined the sensation of it, warm against his own. As if in response to Liam's silent thought, Jason's hand stirred. Slowly, deliberately, it began to move. Liam watched, a breathless anticipation coiling in his throat. Jason's fingers unfurled, creeping closer to Liam's own hand, which lay, almost carelessly, on the sofa cushion. The air in the room grew heavy, suddenly charged with an invisible electricity. Liam's pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. A tremor, fear, hope, rippled through him. This was it, the invisible boundary they had skirted, the line that had kept them apart. Jason's fingertips were a hair's breadth away. Liam felt the phantom warmth, the subtle displacement of air. He held his breath, every nerve ending alight, keenly aware of the proximity, the potential. A silent plea formed in his mind. Don't pull away. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, it ceased. Jason's hand froze. His fingers clenched almost imperceptibly, a barely discernible tremor running through them. His gaze, which had been fixed on the space between their hands, snapped up to meet Liam's. And in that instant, everything fractured. The air, previously electric, became leaden. The unspoken feelings, perched on the precipice of articulation, receded, leaving behind a vacuum of awkwardness. Jason's eyes, usually so guarded, were wide, a flicker of something akin to panic in their depths. He looked away, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. His hand, which had been so close, slowly, almost imperceptibly, retracted, settling back onto the cushion a few inches further away than before. A cold wave washed over Liam, extinguishing the ember of hope that had briefly flared. The comfortable silence shattered, replaced by a brittle, strained quiet. The unmade touch, the one that never happened, hung in the air between them, a ghost of a possibility. Jason cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "Right," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the earlier warmth. "It's late. I should head out." He stood, the movement quick and decisive, a stark contrast to the slow, almost tender approach of his hand moments before. Liam watched him, a knot forming in his stomach. The casual dismissal, the abrupt retreat. It was a familiar pattern, one that always left Liam feeling bruised and bewildered. "Jason," Liam started, his voice barely a whisper, a desperate attempt to grasp at the fading thread of connection. But Jason was already moving towards the door. He didn't look back. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden emptiness of the living room, leaving Liam alone with the specters of almost touches and the heavy weight of unsaid feelings. The burgeoning hope, the tentative warmth, had been doused, leaving behind a cold, unsettling unease. The chasm between them felt wider than ever, bridged only by the memory of a hand that almost reached out and then didn't. The quiet thud of Jason's front door closing echoed in Liam's ears, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than usual. The lingering phantom warmth of almost touch on his hand still tingled, a cruel reminder of what hadn't happened. He sat there for a long time, the television flickering unnoticed, the hum of the refrigerator a monotonous drone. The knot in his stomach tightened, a familiar ache of bewilderment and unfulfilled longing. Jason had been a fleeting shadow, a sudden gust of wind, leaving him feeling bruised and alone. The next morning brought a fresh wave of that emptiness. Liam checked his phone. No texts, no missed calls. It wasn't unusual for Jason to vanish without a trace after their nocturnal visits, but this time felt different. The air between them, usually thick with unspoken understanding, now felt brittle, prone to shattering. Days bled into a week. The usual rhythm of their lives, once a comforting drumbeat, began to falter. Liam would text, a casual, "Hey, want to grab some food?" or "Movie tonight?" The replies, when they came, were increasingly delayed, increasingly vague. "Can't, man. Got some stuff to do." "Nah, busy." "Next time, for sure." The promises of next time started to feel like a mirage, shimmering and always out of reach. Liam found himself staring at his phone, willing it to ring, to light up with Jason's name. His apartment, once a haven, began to feel cavernous, the silence amplified by Jason's absence. He'd cook for one, the portions feeling oversized, a subtle reminder of the space Jason used to fill at his table. He'd walk past their usual coffee shop, a pang of loneliness hitting him as he saw other friends laughing, sharing stories. One Tuesday, Liam decided to be direct. "Everything okay?" he texted, the question feeling naked and vulnerable. The response came hours later. "Yeah, why wouldn't it be?" The brusque reply stung. It was a wall, deliberately built. Liam clenched his jaw, a protective instinct warring with a desperate need to understand. He wanted to push, to demand answers, to shake Jason until the guardedness fell away. But he knew that would only push him further. Jason was like a feral cat, quick to bolt if cornered. He tried a different approach. He drove past Jason's apartment one evening, the dim light in the living room the only sign of life. He considered knocking, but what would he say? "Hey, just checking you're still alive." It sounded absurd. He drove home, the headlights cutting through the growing dusk, a hollow feeling expanding in his chest. The casual cancellations continued, each one a small puncture in Liam's composure. He'd make plans, only for Jason to pull out at the last minute, sometimes with a terse text, other times with no explanation at all. Liam started to anticipate it, a dull ache settling in even before the message arrived. He stopped suggesting things as often, the sting of rejection becoming too much to bear. He found himself replaying that night, the almost touch, the sudden retreat. Had he imagined the flicker of something in Jason's eyes, a mirrored longing? Or had it been purely panic, a desperate need to escape something he couldn't name? The ambiguity was a torment. It kept him hopeful, yet constantly rebuffed. Loneliness became a constant companion. Liam, usually content in his own company, now felt an acute awareness of his solitude. He went to the gym, threw himself into work, even tried a new hobby, pottery, the clay cold and unyielding in his hands. But every quiet moment, every lull in activity, brought Jason's face to mind, the image of him in Liam's bed, so close, so vulnerable, starkly contrasting with his current elusiveness. One Friday night, a night they would usually spend on the couch, watching some terrible movie and trading sarcastic comments, Liam found himself alone with a pizza and a documentary he barely registered. He scrolled through his contacts, almost calling other friends, but the thought felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just anyone's company he craved. It was Jason's. The quiet presence, the shared understanding that transcended words. He sent one last text, a simple, "Miss hanging out, man." He didn't expect a reply. And true to form, his phone remained stubbornly silent, a dark rectangle reflecting his own solitary image. The growing distance between them wasn't just physical. It felt like an emotional chasm opening up, threatening to swallow the very foundation of their friendship. A new face, Mark. The quiet in Liam's apartment, once a comfort, had morphed into an echoing void. Days blurred into weeks, each one widening the emotional gulf between him and Jason. Texts would vanish into the ether for hours, sometimes a full day, only to resurface with a non-committal emoji or a clipped, "busy." The easy intimacy of late-night visits had vanished entirely, leaving Liam with a hollow ache and the ghost of pine and Jason's indefinable scent slowly fading from his sheets. Calls went to voicemail, an unanswered plea in a digital echo chamber. He felt like a specter haunting a forgotten memory. One Tuesday, the muted television a cold companion, a profound loneliness descended. It wasn't merely Jason's absence. It was the gaping hole of shared laughter, the comfortable intimacy he now realized he'd leaned on so heavily. Scrolling aimlessly, his thumb paused on a dating app untouched for months. It felt like a surrender, a desperate reach to fill the encroaching silence. But the alternative was this suffocating quiet. He updated his profile, chose a new photo, and sent a few tentative messages. A reply arrived swiftly from Mark. His profile picture radiated warmth, a kind smile, inviting eyes, and his bio spoke of indie films and a passion for cooking. Their chat flowed easily for a couple of days, mundane topics paving the way for Mark to suggest coffee. Liam agreed, a novel flicker of anticipation stirring in his chest. The cafe was a vibrant hum, the aroma of roasted beans and warm pastries a comforting embrace. Mark was already there, waving from a corner table. Taller than his photo suggested, he possessed a friendly, open face framed by a shock of sandy brown hair. His laugh, a genuine, low rumble, instantly put Liam at ease. They talked jobs, travel dreams, and the delightful absurdities of modern dating. Mark's dry wit coaxed free, uninhibited laughter from Liam, a sound he realized he hadn't produced in weeks. No undercurrent of tension, no baffling subtext, just straightforward, refreshing conversation, a cool balm to frayed nerves. By the time they parted, a pleasant warmth bloomed in Liam's chest, a small crack of light piercing the gloom that had settled around him. A few days later, Jason finally acknowledged Liam's persistent attempts to connect. "Grabbing a beer?" the text read, late on a Friday afternoon. It was the most engagement he'd offered in weeks. Liam felt the familiar pang of frustration, yet a sliver of hope ignited. Perhaps this was the turning point. They met at their usual pub, the one with sticky floors and a raucous jukebox. Jason was already at their booth, nursing a pint. He looked weary, stress lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A tight smile was his greeting as Liam slid in. "Hey," Jason said, his voice a little hoarse. "Sorry I've been out of touch." "Yeah, you have been," Liam replied, striving for an even tone, battling the rising tide of resentment. He ordered a beer, the clinking of glasses momentarily filling the void. "Everything okay?" Jason shrugged, his gaze skittering away. "Just busy. Work, you know." It was the same evasive answer, and it grated on Liam. "Right," Liam said, taking a long swallow of his beer. He decided to just say it, to test the waters. "Actually, I went on a date." Jason froze, his hand suspended mid-air above his glass. His eyes, when they finally met Liam's, were unreadable. "Oh?" he asked, the single syllable flat, devoid of inflection. "Yeah, with a guy named Mark. We went for coffee. It was nice." Liam watched him closely, trying to decipher his reaction. Jason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nice," Jason repeated, his gaze dropping to the condensation ring on the table. The easygoing facade he'd worn moments before evaporated completely. A profound stillness descended, a heavy, oppressive quiet. He picked at a loose thread on the sleeve of his jacket. "He's a good guy," Liam continued, a strange defiance bubbling up. "Funny. We're thinking of going out again." The air in the booth grew thick. Liam could almost feel the tension radiating off Jason. His shoulders were stiff, knuckles white as he gripped his glass. There was no curiosity in his eyes, no playful teasing, just a simmering, unsettling anger that Liam couldn't quite comprehend. It wasn't loud or overt, but it was palpable. A cold wave washing over the small space. "Right," Jason said again, his voice lower this time, almost a growl. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't offer congratulations. He just sat there, emanating a silent fury that made Liam's stomach clench. The small flicker of hope Liam had felt earlier extinguished, replaced by a fresh wave of confusion and a prickle of fear. He had expected something, a reaction, but not this icy, controlled rage. The pleasant warmth from his date with Mark evaporated completely, leaving him chilled to the bone. Jealousy's sting. The sharp ping from his phone, an unexpected jolt in the evening's quiet, wrestled Liam from his half-read novel. Jason. Again. Past midnight, a pattern Jason had unsettlingly revived since Liam first mentioned Mark. A familiar knot of apprehension cinched Liam's stomach. He answered, Jason's hasty breaths already sending a chill down his spine. Can I come over?" The words emerged, clipped, strained. "Jason, it's late. Is everything all right?" Liam's voice, softer than intended, betrayed the gnawing worry. A lengthy silence followed, punctuated by what sounded like a ragged exhalation. "Just need to talk. 5 minutes." Liam knew it would never be 5 minutes. It never was. He also knew, despite the churning unease Jason's nocturnal visits now sparked, he couldn't refuse. Not when Jason sounded so utterly undone. He always relented, drawn by an invisible tether that tightened with each vulnerable plea. 20 minutes later, Jason lay sprawling on Liam's sofa, eyes hollowed, a faint tremor in his hands as he nursed a mug of cooling tea. His jacket remained on. "So," he rasped, "this Mark fellow, how's that progressing?" The question hung, leaden and infused with an emotion Liam couldn't quite place. It wasn't casual inquisitiveness. Liam shifted, suddenly uncomfortable under Jason's piercing gaze. "It's good. He's kind. We've had a few dates." Jason took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving Liam's face. "Kind, you say? What does kind even signify? Blandly kind or genuinely nice?" Liam's brow furrowed, a flicker of irritation igniting within him. "He's truly decent, Jason. Engaging. We share a lot of common ground." A strange defensiveness swelled in him, as if he needed to vindicate his choices. Jason finally averted his gaze, letting it drift towards the window where streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows. "Right. Much in common. Such as?" The question was almost a sneer, a subtle dismissal that pricked at Liam's burgeoning contentment. "We appreciate similar music," Liam offered, feeling foolish even as he spoke. "We both enjoy hiking. He's a good listener." Jason scoffed, a barely audible sound, yet sharp enough to cleave the quiet. A good listener. Well, that's a rarity, isn't it? He drained his tea in one gulp, the empty mug clattering softly on the coffee table. "You know, you dedicate a lot of time to him now. I haven't seen you in ages, truly." The statement was a bald manipulation, a distortion of truth that tightened Liam's jaw. Jason was the one who had vanished, becoming a wraith in their shared existence, only to resurface with these emotionally draining interrogations. "I've been right here, Jason. You're the one who's been preoccupied." Jason ignored the barb, pushing himself from the sofa. He drifted to the bookshelf, tracing a finger along the spines of Liam's collection, his back to Liam. "It just seems like you're moving forward, quickly, with this Mark character." He picked up a framed photo of Liam and his sister from the mantelpiece, turning it over in his hands. "Are you certain he's what you want? I mean, you barely know him." The implication lingered, that Liam was making an error, easily swayed, too quick to supplant what they'd shared. A cold dread settled in Liam's stomach. Jason wasn't probing out of solicitude. He was sowing seeds of doubt, attempting to erode the fragile new happiness Liam was beginning to cultivate. "I like him, Jason. A lot." Liam's voice was resolute, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He refused to let Jason diminish this. Jason turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Okay, just be careful. People aren't always as they appear, you know." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "You used to confide everything in me. Now, it's all about Mark." The accusation stung, though Liam knew its unfairness. He wanted to tell Jason everything, but Jason had erected walls around himself, leaving Liam to navigate the wreckage of their friendship alone. He couldn't comprehend this possessiveness, this sudden, bitter interest in Liam's life, especially when Jason offered nothing in return. The late-night visits persisted, each one punctuated by subtle jabs at Mark or thinly veiled attempts to reclaim Liam's undivided attention. "Remember our 2 a.m. diner runs?" Jason would muse, his eyes holding a wistful, almost melancholic depth. Or, "I caught that new sci-fi flick. You'd have adored it. Pity you're likely tied up with other plans. Liam found himself increasingly torn. On one hand, his dates with Mark were genuinely enjoyable. Mark was easy to converse with. He elicited Liam's laughter, and there was a comforting clarity to him that felt like a balm after months of Jason's enigmatic shifts. He felt a lightness with Mark, a sense of progress that had been sorely absent. But then Jason would materialize, a storm cloud on his horizon, and all that lightness would dissipate, replaced by a churning confusion. One evening, after a particularly pleasant dinner with Mark, Liam arrived home to find Jason on his porch swing, hunched over, gazing at the darkened street. He looked utterly desolate. "Jason, what are you doing here?" Liam asked, concern lacing his voice despite himself. Jason looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Just thinking." He gestured vaguely into the night. "About everything. About us." He paused, then fixed his gaze on Liam, a raw, aching vulnerability in his eyes that caught Liam's breath. "You know, Mark's probably a decent fellow and all, but he doesn't get you like I do, Liam. No one does." The words were a potent cocktail of flattery and manipulation, a desperate, possessive plea. Liam felt a chill despite the warm night air. He was happy with Mark, truly, but Jason's desperate intensity was unsettling, a dark shadow stretching over the fragile beginnings of something new. He was being pulled in opposing directions, and the tension was beginning to fray his nerves. He couldn't decipher Jason's true desire, but he knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever it was deeply rooted in something raw and dangerous. And it was beginning to make him afraid. The familiar scrape of Jason's sneakers on the gravel path outside Liam's window was no longer a comfort, but a trigger. Liam's chest tightened, a familiar knot of dread forming as the soft knock came. It was late again, past midnight. He found Jason on his doorstep, silhouetted by the porch light, a faint tremor in his hands as he clutched a crumpled cigarette packet. His eyes, usually so bright with a mischievous glint, were clouded and distant. "Hey," Jason said, his voice husky, almost a whisper. He didn't meet Liam's gaze, instead focusing on a loose thread on his worn denim jacket. Liam's patience, worn thin by weeks of cryptic visits and veiled accusations, snapped. "Jason, we need to talk." "Really talk?" He stepped back, gesturing him inside, the scent of damp earth clinging to Jason's clothes. Jason hesitated, then shuffled in, his usual swagger replaced by a subdued posture. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, shoulders hunched. The air in the small living room thickened with unspoken words, making it hard to breathe. Liam sat opposite him, hands clasped tightly, his heart thrumming an anxious rhythm against his ribs. "What's going on with you, Jay?" Liam started, his voice softer than he intended, but firm. This whole thing with Mark, your visits, it's not okay. You're acting completely out of character." Jason finally looked up, his expression a complicated mix of hurt and defiance. "Out of character? What's character anymore, Liam? Things change." "People change." His voice was low, laced with an unsettling bitterness. "Yes, people change," Liam agreed, pushing down a rising tide of frustration. "But that doesn't excuse you showing up in the middle of the night, making comments about Mark, acting like you have some kind of claim on my time, My life. He watched Jason's face carefully, trying to decipher the turmoil he saw there. Why are you doing this? A muscle in Jason's jaw twitched. He looked away, fiddling with the cigarette packet again. I miss how things were, that's all, before he came along. The accusation was clear, even without the explicit words. That's not fair, Jason, Liam retorted, his voice rising slightly. You know that. You pulled away. You shut me out. I waited. And then I moved on. You can't just expect me to put my life on hold indefinitely because you decide to show up again and act possessive. Jason surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly across the floorboards. His eyes flashed, a storm gathering behind them. Possessive? Is that what you think this is? You think I'm just trying to mess with your perfect little life now? His voice was louder now, edged with a raw, wounded anger. Maybe I just care, Liam. Maybe I just see things you don't. See what, Jason? Liam stood too, meeting his gaze head on. Tell me, because all I see is you making me feel terrible, making Mark feel uncomfortable, and ruining what was a good thing between us. You won't talk about it, you just lurk, and it's scaring me. The word scaring seemed to strike Jason. His shoulders slumped slightly, and the fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of something akin to shame. He opened his mouth, then closed it, a silent battle raging within him. He ran a hand through his perpetually messy hair, his chest heaving with an unspoken emotion. The scent of rain and earth intensified around him, a storm brewing not just outside, but within the confines of Liam's living room. I can't, Jason mumbled, his voice barely audible. He turned abruptly, heading for the front door, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Jason, wait! Liam called out, but Jason didn't pause. He yanked the door open, the cool night air rushing in, carrying with it the distant sound of crickets. Liam walked to the doorway, watching Jason's retreating back as he hurried down the path, almost stumbling in the dim light. His heart ached, a sharp, physical pain. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't Jason. I need a break, Jason, Liam said, his voice clear, cutting through the silence of the night. His words hung in the air, heavy and final. From all of this, from us, I can't do this anymore. Jason stopped at the edge of the yard, his back to Liam, his shoulders stiff. He stood there for a long moment, unmoving, a statue carved from shadows and regret. Then, without a word, he continued walking, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Liam alone under the pale glow of the porch light, the silence echoing with the unspoken and the unsaid. The air felt cold, empty. Liam closed the door, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden profound quiet. He was sad, profoundly so. But beneath the sadness, a fragile sense of relief began to unfurl. It was over. For now. He hoped. The confession. The bass thrummed a rhythm through Liam's chest, vibrating up his legs to the soles of his feet. Mark laughed beside him, the sound clear and bright even over the din of conversation and music. They were pressed into a corner of Ben's crowded living room, a haven of slightly less intense noise. Liam felt a lightness he hadn't realized he'd been missing, a genuine ease that came with Mark's uncomplicated presence. They'd spent the last few days in a comfortable bubble, Liam grateful for the distraction from the lingering ache of his last conversation with Jason. He'd needed the break, truly, and the fragile peace he now felt was a testament to that. "Another drink?" Mark shouted over the music, already leaning towards the kitchen. His hand brushed Liam's arm, a familiar, warm contact. Liam nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Please, something less sticky." He'd apparently been given a concoction involving grenadine and something vaguely citrusy earlier, and his teeth felt like they were coated in sugar. Mark grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Consider it done." He squeezed Liam's arm once more before disappearing into the throng heading towards the makeshift bar. Liam leaned back against the wall, surveying the swirling mass of bodies. The air was thick with the scent of cheap beer, perfume, and something vaguely metallic, like spilled liquor drying on a hot surface. He watched the colorful lights from a string of fairy lights taped haphazardly around the window shimmer off dancing figures, feeling a pleasant detachment. He was here, present, but also a little removed, still processing the quiet shift in his own emotional landscape. The absence of Jason's erratic presence had, surprisingly, created space for something new to bloom, something quieter and less volatile. His gaze drifted, almost idly, towards the doorway where people were constantly coming and going. And then he saw him. Jason. He stood slightly apart from the flow, leaning against the doorframe, a half-empty bottle of beer dangling from his hand. The usual defiant spark in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a hollow, almost vacant stare. His shoulders were hunched, and the way his head was bowed gave him an air of profound dejection. He looked utterly alone, a solitary, desolate figure amidst the vibrant chaos. Liam's breath hitched. A fresh wave of sadness, unexpected and sharp, washed over him. He'd told himself he needed space, and he did. But seeing Jason like this, so profoundly unhappy, twisted something in his gut. He realized with a pang that he hadn't fully considered the impact of their strained separation on Jason, only on himself. Jason's eyes, as if drawn by an invisible thread, lifted and met Liam's across the crowded room. The distance between them seemed to stretch, filled with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. There was no anger in Jason's gaze now, only a raw, almost childlike vulnerability that made Liam's chest ache. It was a look Liam recognized from those late-night visits, a look that had always stirred a protective instinct within him, even as it confused him. He watched, mesmerized and rooted to the spot, as Jason slowly pushed himself off the doorframe. The movement seemed heavy, labored. He started to weave his way through the laughing, talking bodies, his eyes never leaving Liam's. Each step felt deliberate, hesitant. The usual confidence that had characterized Jason's every stride was gone, replaced by an uncertainty that was both heartbreaking and unsettling. As Jason drew closer, Liam noticed the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his jaw was clenched. There were shadows under his eyes, deeper than usual, and his usually neat hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, a stark contrast to the easygoing Liam and Mark had been enjoying. "Liam," Jason said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the noise, clear and distinct. He was standing directly in front of Liam now, close enough for Liam to smell the faint scent of beer on his breath, mixed with something else, something sharp and metallic. Tears. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. He couldn't speak, could only meet Jason's gaze, a silent question hanging between them. Jason's eyes were glistening, and a single tear traced a path down his cheek, catching the light. He swallowed hard, his throat working. I can't do this anymore. His voice cracked, raw with emotion. Liam frowned, a surge of confused concern overriding his earlier sadness. Do what, Jason? He asked gently, his own voice sounding strangely calm despite the tumult inside him. Pretend, Jason choked out, another tear falling. He reached out a trembling hand, slowly, tentatively, and took Liam's. His touch was cold at first, then warmed, a desperate, anchoring grip. Pretend that you don't matter to me, that you're just my friend. Liam's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, trying to decipher the meaning behind Jason's words, the intensity in his eyes. Jason tightened his grip on Liam's hand, his knuckles white. His gaze was fixed on Liam, pleading, urgent. I love you, Liam, he whispered, the words tearing from him like a confession of a deeply held secret. I'm in love with you. The world tilted. The music, the laughter, the entire bustling party faded into a distant hum. All that remained was Jason's tear-streaked face, the desperate hope in his eyes, and the warmth of his hand enclosing Liam's. Surprise warred with a sudden, dizzying hope that bloomed in Liam's chest, a fragile, trembling flower pushing through the hard ground of confusion and heartbreak.